UFC Vegas 88 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to get things started in the bantamweight division with Campos Gregorio, a -162 favorite, with Chad and Hellinger on the comeback at +136. And we'll start on the Gregorio side. You guys recognize that name if you've watched my Dana White's Contender Series content over the summer. This guy was a big bet for me as an underdog. He fought Cameron Smotherman, and for whatever reason, he was a pretty sizable underdog in that spot, and he knocked out Smotherman instantly. It was an awesome knockout, but I do have some concerns with him at the UFC level. I just don't think that Chad and Hellinger is going to be the guy to expose those concerns that I have about him. So I actually think this is a pretty good spot for Gregorio here. I think he's the rightful favorite, and I expect him to get the finish against Chad and Hellinger, who is turning 38 years old later this year, so certainly getting close to hanging it up. But honestly, this guy, I view him more of like a regional journeyman type of fighter. Like, I never thought he was UFC level. He fought Muan Gaffarov, won a split decision on Contender Series a couple years ago. I didn't even think he won that fight. And then outside of the Jesse Strader fight, who's a certified bum, who was 0-2 in the UFC, got cut by the UFC, that's the only win on Ann Hellinger's record, and he dropped round one and was getting wrestled in that fight as well. And then he came back, he looked good, he hurt him, whatever. Strader's never had good durability. Strader never won a UFC fight. And then outside of that, what has Ann Hellinger showed us? Well, he dropped every single round to Alatang Hai Lee, and then he dropped the first two rounds against Jose Johnson and got submitted in the third. So I don't trust this guy's round winning ability. I don't trust his durability, and I just don't really see how he wins this fight outside of being able to finish Gregorio. Like, the one thing Ann Hellinger does have is he's got heart and he's got power. So you always have to respect his power, because he can land a kill shot even if he's losing the fight. And then he does have a little bit of a sneaky submission game as well. But outside of that, man, I don't see him winning rounds here. I think he has to hurt Gregorio. I think Gregorio's just as live to hurt Ann Hellinger, probably more live. Gregorio's also got some really sharp leg kicks as well that I think he'll have success with. And I think Gregorio's shown that he can land a takedown or two if he needs to as well. So I think he's the more consistent round winner, and I think he gets the finish here. We're going Gregorio by TKO. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Corey McKenna, a small favorite now at -125. The comeback on Jacqueline Amorim is +105. And this is one where I think it's a very obvious live betting spot for McKenna, because we've seen time and time again from Amorim that she just doesn't have much outside of that first round. What she does have, she's a very good submission grappler, but outside of getting a finish in that first round, the cardio tends to cliff dive. And we saw that in her UFC debut against Sam Hughes. Hughes fought out of some really tough spots in round one, and then Amorim was basically done after round one. She tried to pull guard a couple times, cardio looked terrible, started getting real telegraphed with sloppy shots, and really just wanted no part in that fight outside of the first round. Now, she did end up getting a third round finish in her next fight against Montserrat Ruiz. She managed her cardio a little bit better, but I still think it's a concern. And against somebody like Corey McKenna, I think if McKenna is able to get out of that first round, then she's certainly live to take over. She's not a bad grappler herself. She should have the striking advantage outside of the first round, because in the first round, I do think Amorim, she's much bigger. She's going to have like a 10-inch reach advantage. She's not a great striker, but I do think she's going to be aggressive in forcing the grappling exchanges. So that's why in terms of DraftKings, I'm more interested on the Amorim side, because she clearly has the bigger round one finishing potential. But just know that it comes with some significant risk, because if that first round sub doesn't materialize, she's probably going to not only not score well on DraftKings, but probably end up losing as well. So the pick is going to be Amorim by submission, but potential live betting look for McKenna if Amorim doesn't get the job done. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Josh Kalibau, a -184 favorite. The comeback on Danny Silva is +154. And this is one where I like the underdog here. I've never been a Josh Kalibau guy, and I just think Silva is going to be the more consistent minute winner in this fight. I trust his volume more. The guy's a good boxer. He's an 8-1 prospect fighting out of California. He's another Dana White's Contender Series veteran. And him and Angel Pacheco put on an absolute war on Contender Series this past season. I think you can trust the volume. He landed over 200 significant strikes in that, landed multiple takedowns as well. I think he's going to be the more active fighter of the two. And again, I've just never been a Kalibau guy because he's one of those fighters. He's low volume. Yes, he's got some power, but he needs those big minutes because he's just not a good consistent round winner. And I just think the price is off here for Danny Silva. I think Silva's at worst going to be competitive, and I actually favor him to be winning rounds here. I think this hits the judges' scorecards, and if that's the case, I want the more active fighter, the better boxer, in my opinion, in Danny Silva. We're going Silva by decision. That's the official pick. Next up in the flyweight division, we have Rafael Filho, a -180 favorite. The comeback on O'Day Osborne is +150, and we'll start on the Filho side. He's coming off a first-round submission over my guy Daniel Perez, who I had a big bet on Perez in that fight. Perez ripped him to the body multiple times, drops him with a body shot, and honestly, I'll go to my grave. Goddard would have stepped in and stopped that fight had Perez, followed up after he dropped him with the body shot. They usually don't let body shots that drop people. They usually have a quick trigger on those type of knockdowns when it's a body shot. And if you watch the tape, Goddard was starting to step in and Perez backed up and waved him up. I just think if he followed that up with 1 or 2 strikes, it ends up getting waved there. But I definitely have PTSD from that fight. Unfortunate because then Perez his cardio was cooked. Filho took him down and ended up submitting him. And that's really Filio's best asset is his submission grappling. He's a high-level black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's a very good submission grappler. His wrestling, not that great, but I think he doesn't necessarily need great wrestling against O'Day Osborne. Osborne doesn't have good takedown defense. Osborne also seems to have a little bit of quit in him. He's another guy who, similar to Kolobau, where he needs those big moments. He needs those early finishes because round to round, he's just not great because he's not forcing the grappling. He doesn't have super high output on the feet. So this is one where I just expect Filho to get the fight where he needs it on the mat and eventually end up getting the submission. Osborne's been finishing 5 of his 6 professional losses, and I think here comes the next one. We're going Filho by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the welterweight division, we have Thiago Moises, a -410 favorite. The comeback on Mitch Ramirez is +320. And we'll start with Moises. He's coming off that second round TKO loss against Benoit Saint Denis, and that fight snapped a 2-fight winning streak for him. Now, he's not a great striker. He's definitely more of a grappler, and historically, he is being outlanded on the feet. He does have some sharp leg kicks. His hands are not really too much to be concerned about. He wants to get the fight to the ground, and typically he usually ends up doing that, whether it's pulling guard, somehow forcing a grappling exchange. He only averages around 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, but we know he wants to be grappling. Most of his wins have come by submission, and he holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's going to be the biggest advantage in this fight against a guy in Mitch Ramirez who fought on last season of Contender Series. For those that don't remember, he fought Carlos Prates, and I actually bet him decent size as a big underdog there, and he didn't end up coming through. And it was very clear that Prates, the speed and the power, he was able to hurt Ramirez early, and Ramirez just kind of wanted no part of it. That was one of the first times that Ramirez really felt any sort of opposition. So I think it was a good learning experience for him. We know the cardio has never been great for him. Most of his wins have come inside the first round, and he fought a low level of competition on the regional scene. Now, he followed up that Contender Series loss with a first round TKO finish over an LFA. So now he's getting a call on short notice here. And I just think it's a tough spot for him. As much as I love Mitch Ramirez, previously was addicted to heroin, spent 4 years in prison. He's got a great story. I'm rooting for him, and I want to see him succeed. I just think this is a really tough matchup on short notice against Thiago Moises, who's going to have much better cardio, who's going to be the much better submission grappler. I think Ramirez has to hurt him early, which is possible. But outside of that happening, I think Ramirez just gets gassed out and out-grappled here. We're going Thiago Moises by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the women's bantamweight division, we have Josiah Nunes, a -135 favorite with Chelsea Chandler on the comeback at +114. And I do have some concerns on whether or not this fight, like if there was one fight that was going to be pulled due to weigh-in issues, I think it's probably this one, because the fight is scheduled at bantamweight, but Nunes, after her UFC debut, which was at bantamweight, she's fought her last 2 at featherweight. Chelsea Chandler's debut was at a catchweight, and then her follow-up was at featherweight. So I have concerns that either of these girls are going to be able to make the weight here, but if it does, we might as well break it down. We'll start on the Nunes side. You know, she's short for the division, but she does have long arms, and she's very powerful. Fights out of the southpaw stance. She's active with the leg kicks, but she wants to swing crazy and land that big left hand. And when she does, she's capable of knocking anybody out in the division. She has real power, but she's very sloppy. The cardio isn't great, and the ground game is not good. She can be taken down, and once she's taken down, she's basically just laying there off her back, might throw up a couple of low percentage subs, but I don't want to see her taken down if I'm expecting her to win here. And then on the flip side, Chelsea Chandler is more of just a brawler. You know, she fights out of the southpaw stance. She's just 5-2, and 3 of those wins have come by knockout, but she just wants to move forward. She's got some solid boxing. She's got some power as well. And if she can land takedowns, that's where she's at her best. You know, on top, she's very physical. If she gets in dominant positions on the ground, she is going to be dangerous. But I also think she's very green still in terms of MMA. I think her defense is not good. She fights with her hands down. And that's something that I could see being a problem against Josiane Nunes, because Nunes is going to land some of those big overhands. And she has the power to really alter the fight. And we saw what happened the last time she fought someone much taller than her that didn't really have striking defense, and that was Bea Malecki. So, and I'm not saying that Chelsea Chandler isn't better than Malecki, but I just think that Nunes is going to be able to land clean here, and that's what scares me about this matchup. But if Chandler can get inside and get the takedowns, then she's certainly a live dog. So it's one that I think you'll want to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. I'm going to side with Nunes because I expect her to be landing those big power shots. We're going to say Nunes by decision. I wouldn't sleep on a knockout either, though. Next up, we have Mike Davis making his return to the octagon. He's a minus 310 favorite with Natan Levy on the comeback at plus 250. And I expect Davis to be one of the more confident plays that I think the field will gravitate to, because in general, he's a fighter that a lot of people like. He's got a fun skill set. He's a great boxer. He's got legitimate knockout power. 7 of his 10 wins have come by knockout, but he's also relied on that well-roundedness lately. He's landed 14 takedowns over his last 3 fights, so we've seen him be more willing to go to the wrestling. I'm not sure if that's going to be the game plan here against Natan Levy, who also wants to be going to the wrestling. Levy averages around 5.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, but outside of some nice kicks at range, that's really all Levy has is takedowns, because he doesn't really control guys well. He's not really a huge submission threat either, and I expect Mike Davis to have a clear striking advantage, a volume advantage as well, and neither guy's cardio has really looked all that great, but at least Davis usually only starts to look tired after he's really pumped out a ton of volume, whereas Levy, I think, just starts to look tired in general. But I just think it's one where Davis just pretty much has him covered. He's a big favorite, but it makes sense to me. We're going Mike Davis by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Gerald Meerschaert, a minus 225 favorite, with Brian Barberena on the comeback at plus 185. And this is one where Meerschaert's one of the more expensive fighters on DraftKings this week, but I actually think it makes sense because stylistically speaking, this is a pretty good spot for Meerschaert. We know he doesn't bring much in terms of the striking while the fight plays out on the feet, but what he does bring is he's a very dangerous submission grappler. Most of his wins have come by submission. All he really needs is one tangle up, one grappling exchange, and he can put your lights out on the mat. And that's kind of what I'm expecting here, because in other matchups, Meerschaert is kind of struggling to get the fight to the ground. His wrestling's not super great, but I think against Barberena, it really doesn't matter because the dude has paper hips. He's never been able to stuff takedowns. He defends at under 50% in the UFC. So even if you think Barberena is going to have a striking advantage, which I'm not even sure he's going to have that much of a striking advantage, but even if you think that, you kind of have to expect him to be on his back here multiple times throughout the fight and fending off submissions. And I actually think if you're going to tangle around that long with Gerald Meerschaert down there, he's going to end up finding the neck end submitting you. Barberena has been submitted multiple times in his career, and I think it comes again this Saturday. We're going Meerschaert by submission. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we're back in the women's bantamweight division as Macy Chiasson comes in as a minus 238 favorite with Pani Kianzad on the comeback at plus 195. And this is one where I expect Pani to be more competitive than the betting odds suggest. But ultimately, I do see her losing a competitive decision here. Now, these fighters, they fought once back in 2018. That was the Ultimate Fighter finale. They also used to train together as well. Now, Chiasson, she's not a good striker. She doesn't enter the pocket well. She's very sloppy on the feet, but she's very physically strong. She's very big for the division. She's good at holding her opponents up against the fence, muscling them to the ground. She averages around 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, and that's clearly going to be her big advantage here, because we've seen Kianzad get taken down and out-grappled in the past, and as recently as her last fight against Ketlin Vieira. But on the feet, I think Kianzad's a better striker. She's going to be landing more. I just think it's one where I don't think she has the power to punish Chiasson for just blitzing the pocket very sloppily with no defense. And I think Chiasson's just going to be able to hold her up, muscle her to the ground, and that's going to end up being the difference here. So I'm going to side with Chiasson, but this is one where I think there's going to be a lot of cage push, and we know that doesn't typically score well for DraftKings. So on a 13-fight slate, assuming no fights fall off, I just think there's better fights to target up and down the card, but we're going Chiasson by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Isaac Dolgarian, a -192 favorite now. The comeback on Christian Rodriguez is +160, and we've seen heavy line movement in favor of Isaac Dolgarian here, and I get it to a degree. This dude looks like the absolute stud package. You know, he's won every fight inside the first round, including his amateur career. So he had 3 AMI fights, 6 professional fights. He's won every single one inside the first round. He comes from a collegiate wrestling background, a high-level collegiate wrestling background at that. And he knocked out Francis Marshall in his UFC debut. So he showed up to the UFC and performed at that level. Now, the concern that I have with him is that we really haven't seen him face any type of opposition, because he fought very low level of competition on the regional scene. And Francis Marshall, that fight was all one-way traffic. So we really haven't seen him tested or go through any type of adversity. We also haven't seen him fight outside of that first round. So we really don't know if the pace and the cardio is going to hold up. I expect that the wrestling will regardless, because his wrestling is that good. Now, on the flip side, Christian Rodriguez, he's derailed multiple hype trains over the course of his career. You know, he just fought Cameron Simon and ended up beating him. He fought Raul Rosas Jr. and ended up beating him. Like, this dude has had success against similar style of fighters like Dolgarian, people that want to take him down and want to grapple him, like Raul Rosas Jr. And Rodriguez, you can take him down, but it's really difficult to hold him down. He's a good scrambler. He's going to work back to his feet. And now on the feet, he's mainly a counter striker, so he doesn't have a ton of high output. So even when he's winning, it's typically on thin margins. But I just expect him to be fighting off the wrestling of Dolgarian here. I think the size and physicality is going to be a difference as well. Christian Rodriguez moving up to featherweight on short notice here. Dolgarian, the natural featherweight. So I think that's going to come into play here. I think this is another one similar to the McKenna fight that I mentioned, where it could be a potential live betting spot if Dolgarian looks good in round 1, but maybe starts to fade and Christian could take over later. But ultimately, I'm going to side with Dolgarian, because I just think the more explosive fighter who has more of a path to victory with the wrestling is probably going to get his hand raised. So we're going to go Dolgarian by decision. That's the official pick. And next up, we have the biggest betting favorite on the card with Kennedy Zachukwu, a -575 favorite, with Ovince St. Preux on the comeback at +425. And I don't have to spend a ton of time on this one, because I think this should be mostly all one-way traffic with Kennedy Zachukwu. Now, he is somebody that typically does kind of build into fights, and so I actually kind of like the round 2, round 3 knockout angles as opposed to round 1, because St. Preux, yes, he's been finished a bunch, yes, he's old, yes, he's slow, but he's capable in round 1, at least capable of staying alive. It's typically once we see him start to get tired outside of that first round, that's when he seems to have more of a quit in him. And Zachukwu is a guy who historically is more of a guy who puts it on more later in the fight anyway. So that's why I kind of like the round 2, round 3 angle. So it just comes down to whether or not you want to spend all the way up to him on DraftKings. My lean right now is to probably be underweight to him, maybe even potentially fade him altogether at that price. But that's going to be something we discuss more on the DraftKings Deep Dive show at fightnumbers.com on Thursday night. But in terms of the official pick, it's going to be Zachukwu. It's going to be by round 2 or round 3 knockout, which brings us to our co-main event, as Brian Battle is a -175 favorite, and the comeback on Ange Lusa is plus 145. And we'll start on the battle side. To my surprise, this dude has won 4 of his 5 UFC fights, with the only loss coming against my guy, Rinat Fakhretdinov. And he's finished 3 of those 4 UFC fights. So he's certainly been improving since the Ultimate Fighter days. He's leaned out a ton. He looks absolutely shredded as well. And you see it from fight to fight. He is making improvements. He's pretty well-rounded wherever the fight goes, but he's not great in any one area. And I think he still struggles in terms of the striking defense and in terms of the takedown defense, because he struggles to defend takedowns. He's at just 45% takedown defense in the UFC. Now, on the flip side, Ange Lusa is a guy who I've always kind of wanted to believe is a little bit better than maybe he is. I bet him against Jack Della Maddalena on Contender Series, and he's somebody that I just think is pretty well-rounded here, and I think he's a live dog that's going to be fighting for our money this weekend. I expect him to be the more active striker on the feet over 15 minutes, and I think he has a potential wrestling path here. He's gone to the wrestling in most of his fights. He's got power on the feet with 5 of his 10 wins coming by knockout, and I just think he's got multiple ways to win. I trust his volume over 15 minutes more than I do Bryan Battle, and maybe I'm just going to be historically really wrong about Bryan Battle, but I just can't help myself but try to fade him here at a decent price in Ange Lusa, who I think is going to be the better fighter over 15 minutes. We're going Lusa by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as Tai Tuivasa comes in as a small favorite at minus 120 with Marcin Tybura on the comeback at plus 100. And you guys know me. I love rooting for guys like Ty. I think he's a good personality. You know, the shoeies, I absolutely love it. But I also just think this dude hits very hard. And that's always going to play at heavyweight when these guys are just so powerful that it only takes one shot to put your lights out. And even though he's not interested in grappling, his takedown defense is bad. He defends at 54% in the UFC. If you put him on his back, he doesn't really have any get-ups. He doesn't know what to do. But while the fight plays out on the feet, he's going to swing them heavies. And all he needs to do is connect one time. And I think he's going to have multiple chances here against Marcin Tybura, who's pretty well-rounded. Obviously, he's better on the ground, averages around a takedown and a half per 15 minutes, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If he's able to get the takedowns against Ty, he probably finishes him, and he definitely wins this fight. But I just worry about the durability, man. Ty swings very heavy. Even in fights where guys try to grapple him, he's typically having at least a couple big moments on the feet. And I just think if that happens here, he has such a good chance of knocking out Tybura. Tybura's been knocked out 5 times in his career. And I just think Ty's going to connect here and test the chin and make it number 6. So hopefully we see another shoey on Saturday. We're going Tai Tuivasa, bam, bam, gets the KO, gets his hand raised on Saturday. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings, ownership projections as well, a bunch of other stuff coming down the pipeline. Be sure to check it out and follow me on Twitter at Jon Kelly DFS. A lot of big announcements coming in the next couple days and weeks with some new betting tools and other stuff available at fightnumbers.com. So be sure to follow me on Twitter so you don't miss it. Best of luck this weekend, guys, and we'll see you next time.